is coming to the United States after this back and forth was seen earlier on as being an encouraging development. You might recall overnight when that news broke, the futures, which had been down triple digits, paired that to, mid double digits. And then we got these reports of how widespread these latest tariffs that we're slapping on the Chinese and the added goods affected. And of course, there was Katie barred the door. All right, the National Taxpayers Union Senior Fellow Mattie Duppler and First Trust Chief Economist Brian Westbury. So, Katie, what are you, or Mattie, I apologize, what are you looking at as far as what's really behind this? The fear that it's bigger than thought, or that it's just going to be nastier than we expected?
Yeah, so Neil, initially I think there were two ways to look at this new tariff threat. One is the United States trying to save face during a negotiation that won't produce a deal that Americans would be able to stand behind. And second is that it's a negotiating tactic. I think certainly in the beginning of this week, the markets have reacted in a way that though they're down, they're not down maybe as much as you would expect if they think that a deal is off the table as a result. So certainly I think that the markets are viewing this as a negotiating tactic. Now, what that actually means for Americans, of course, is that tariffs are going to go into effect. And those aren't just a negotiating tactic. As you mentioned at the beginning of the show, this will have widespread effect on consumer goods. Something to keep in mind is that when the Trump administration started this threat of tariffs back last year in the spring, they cultivated the list of tariffs for a 10% tariff, cultivated a list of products for a 10% tariff carefully so that it inoculated a lot of Americans from the full impact of having increased costs on those goods. This next tranche of tariffs won't have that same kind of effect. It will certainly impact consumers, and it will certainly impact downstream businesses that import their inputs from China. That will have an economic effect that we don't even know the full extent of that yet.
Yeah, we don't. Brian Westbury, one of the things that's interesting, I think a lot of these businesses had prepared and were prepared for the 10% hit. They had stockpiled on a lot of Chinese goods, done all of that.
Right.
They weren't prepared for this dragging on, or that it would extend to possibly 25% and an additional $325 billion worth of goods. That might never come to pass. I get that. But they don't. They're scrambling right now, and the message from them is help.
Yeah, well, look, Neil, there's no doubt that this affects some companies more than others. But when we look at the broad macro economy, last year, in 2018, consumers spent $14 trillion on just goods, which is mostly what we import. It was $4.4 trillion. So even if we were to put a 25% tariff on all $525 billion worth of goods, it's 2.3% of all spending on goods. And that's about where inflation is. So the bottom line is from a macro perspective, I don't believe that even if we went all the way, first of all, I don't think it would start a massive trade war around the world like Smoot-Hawley. And second of all, I don't think it would affect consumers as much as people think. And companies will find workarounds. There's South Korea, there's Taiwan.
Right. And a good many of them are doing that. They're changing their production facilities to the other points in Southeast Asia, but they all haven't been doing that.
No, you're absolutely right. And farmers are very worried about this.
Right.
But, one thing to remember is, who knows? We'll find out on Friday. But a week before the Canadian-Mexican trade deal, President Trump threatened Canada too. And then 4 or 5 days later, boom, we had a deal. And so this is partly the way he negotiates. And we know that China backstepped first. They were reneging on some of the promises that they made. And he's coming out and saying, no way, you're not going to renege. And then don't forget.
Well, that's what we have been charging. And the Chinese say that was not the case. But we're at this point now. We're at loggerheads, so we'll have to see. But I do want to thank you both very, very much. All these breaking news developments. I want to bring in Congressman Mike Kelly, Republican from the beautiful state of Pennsylvania.